Well, Beth, you've outdone yourself. We do have some skeletons, and what else do we have?
A beard?
We had a beard briefly, but you've outdone us, really. Although,
I mean, a onesie's an easy way to dress up, you know?
right, well, I'll say something, hopefully not to the embarrassment of this class, but I teach a ecosystems ecology class in the morning, and they all dressed up to look like me. They all look like me. They had like the little button-up shirts, they had hiking boots on, you know, they all dressed up to look like me, the whole
Did
class.
you get a picture of that?
Yes, actually, I got one of my
Vacation
photos.
was?
I got a bunch of photos of it. Yeah, it's very sweet. And
I'm assuming it was organized.
clearly it was organized. That doesn't spontaneously happen. Yeah, it took me a while to figure it out. I'm like, that's a little funny that they look like that.
They're like, my students are so well dressed today. I don't know what it is.
Well, I wouldn't call it well dressed. I would call it the dress of an ecologist. It's like the ecology profile, you know, the like casual button-up shirt and hiking boots. It's like you go to an Ecological Society of America meeting, and that's basically what you get. Yeah, with the men, mostly beards, I guess, too. Anyway, well, it is such a pleasure. And Beth, by the way, what are you exactly?
I'm a trash panda. I'm a raccoon. You're an ecologist. You should know your species.
Well, I didn't have it. Did everyone know that? Am I the only one
yeah.
who didn't get that? No, so we're not, okay.
We have lots of raccoons in Los Angeles.
Oh,
So they're very
nice.
recognizable. Yeah, we call them trash pandas because they go through the trash.
You know,
They're very loud too.
when I was during that semester that Cindy and I spent in London, there were foxes everywhere. Like my backyard was like basically a playground of foxes, and they'd like do play fighting with each other. So like every night there was like a fox fight in my backyard. Apparently during the pandemic, the foxes really kind of infiltrated London, something about not having all the traffic. They just totally took over London. So it's basically run by foxes now, which is kind of cool. Anyway, it is such an enormous pleasure to have Beth Karlin with us here today. Beth and I met, I don't even know how long ago that was, Beth, but it was a long time ago, wasn't it? It was in DC.
I do. It was 2000, it was the 2009, I think, back.
2009 Behavior, Energy, and Climate Change Conference. And as I mentioned, Beth is sort of like a central figure. She is indeed the spirit of the Behavior, Energy, and Climate Change Conference, and makes the event incredibly, it's obviously an issue of import and seriousness, but Beth makes it fun and slightly less serious. But I invited Beth in to class, as I do every year, because I think of Beth as sort of a master communicator on issues of science and climate change in particular. And Beth has a wonderful CV, which I could try to recount to you off the top of my head, but I'm not going to be very good at it. So I'm not going to do that. Instead, I'm just going to say that Beth and my relationship is an opportunity, is an example of serendipity. We just, as I mentioned, I think last class, we just sat next to each other at a meeting and started chatting with each other, and have been friends and in a minor way collaborators really since then. And that's a good way to get to know people. So Beth, I'm not going to say any more. I want to turn things over to you because I want to give you as much time as possible to share your wisdom with the class. So you are on.
Awesome. Well, I will, let's see, let me screen share. That's always the hardest part for me. There we go, technology. All right, and then slideshow. How does that look?
It looks good. Yeah.
Perfect. So, and I think I always say this when John invites me, and our relationship is a testament to serendipity and to John Peterson, because it was 2009, I was a second year PhD student, and I had a huge, this was one of my first professional conferences. I had a huge bout of imposter syndrome, and I walked into rooms and I sat towards the back and I didn't talk to anybody, because I just wasn't sure if I had anything to say. And I remember, whatever, speaker on the talk, and John turns to me and he goes, "What did you think of that?" And I said, like, brilliantly, I'm like, well, I'm a grad student, so I don't know. And he just goes, well, you know what you think, and kind of like pulled me out. And I always say that John was one of the first people that like made me feel when you're in school, like when you interact with professors, they treat you like a student. And when you go to a conference, even as a student, people, not everyone, but the people like John, the great people in our field, and there are a lot of them, treat you like a colleague. And he was one of the first people that made me realize that I had a place in this world of behavior change and sustainability and climate change. So I will always come and speak to his classes when I can, because and he's the type of professor that students dress up as for Halloween. That's another testament to who you are. So yeah, I'm happy to be here. And my path has taken a little bit different of a route. So I'll tell you a little bit. I'm going to share. I usually do 3 thoughts on climate communication, but I came up with 4 this time. So this is similar to, I do like variations every year, and I put together a few things about climate communication based on behavioral science that I think can help you regardless of what direction you go in, if you go into behavioral science or ecology or what have you. These I think are great skills that help us, advocacy, campaigning, scientific presentations, what have you. So first, so this is what I'm going to talk through, these 4 thoughts. Keep it simple, use a story structure, connect the dots, and medium matters. Before I do that, I will tell you a little bit about my why and a little bit about my background, because I do think it's really interesting how all of us enter the space and all these different paths to working in sustainability and climate change. So this is what my job looks like a lot. I'm not always wearing a raccoon onesie. I wouldn't say I never have before. But I give a lot of talks, but my career didn't look like this. Actually, in my 20s, my life looked a lot more like this. I was a teacher, I was an educator, and I know what you might be thinking. There's no adult in this photo. You are absolutely wrong. That was me. I was 28 years old. I did not look like an adult in the photo, but I worked as a naturalist, an outdoor science instructor, and a high school activities director. And I loved engaging with young people experimentally. So I came to this love for working in climate change and working in sustainability through a deep love for this planet. I lived in the outdoors. I did hiking. I took kids. I worked at, this is a picture of Yellowstone National Park, where I spent a summer as a wilderness interpreter. Interpretive ranger. And I realized that you can engage people to care about the world if you let them interact instead of just talking at people statistics or science. Like, I was trained as an ecology teacher, even though I don't have the background that John does. But if I talked to them about the science of the environment, they were marginally interested. I taught high school students. I spent a lot of time teaching 5th graders, 5th grade camp. But if I got them engaged and we looked for animal like prints or scat or climbed up in trees, like, that was so much more exciting. So I realized that, but I reached a point in my late 20s that I wanted to influence more people than I could just the students or visitors to a park that I could reach in a day or a week or a month or a year. And it's a wandering lifestyle, and I kind of wanted to like settle in and get an office. So I thought about, like, what can I do? And I realized that part of what I was doing was science communication, was climate communication, right? I was trying to find what I wanted to say about this planet and our connection to it and our responsibility to it, and what young people were interested in, right? 5th graders wanted to get away from their parents and go to sleepaway camp for a week. High school students wanted to be out, whatever. And things like rappelling and being out in nature were really great, and you could use that to engage people. And so I realized I wanted to study that, to do that on a higher level. So I went back to school and I started reading about research that was so interesting, and the power of behavioral science. So this is an image from a study that I read about when I was thinking about what to do going back to school. I knew that I wasn't really a hard scientist. I was a psychology major in undergrad. I was a school counselor. I had been an educator, and people were shown this photo for a long time, and then they were asked a question: did you see a broken headlight? 50% of people were asked, did you see a broken headlight? This is what who ended up being one of my mentors and professors in grad school, Elizabeth Loftus, in the 70s, found that the replacement of an indefinite with a definite article, meaning if you said, did you see a broken headlight versus if you asked people, did you see the broken headlight, increased false memory recall. And that blew my mind. Like that you could change one word, 3 letters, and literally people might think they saw something they didn't. And we saw 80% increases in false memory recall with the replacement of an indefinite to a definite article. And I thought the power of messaging and framing, I want to apply this. And this was in 2007, 6, 7, 8. I want to apply this to climate change. And at the time, this was an emerging field. The conference that John and I met at was the 2nd or 3rd ever back. Now there's so much more going on, but I just thought I want to go to there and I want to get as good as I can. So what I did is I went to grad school. I said, I want to be a scientist. I want to study this. I think this is amazing and I want to apply it to climate change. So I went back to school. I got my PhD in something called social ecology, which is applied interdisciplinary behavioral science. So I studied psychology, I studied communications, I studied informatics, I studied sociology, and I was able to put them all together to focus on not the discipline, but the problem of climate change. How can we bring in insights from all these disciplines? So that's what you'll feel a little of that in my talk, that I'm not like a strict social psychologist like Cindy Franz, who's another dear friend. I'm not like a strict ecologist. Like I bring in from all these different, I guess ecology is very similar. Social ecology is like the ecology of people, right? So instead, if you want to understand the pond, you don't study just the frogs or just the rocks or just the water, you study everything, right? And we can look at social systems the same way. So after that, I was so fortunate. I finished my PhD in 2014. I had 3 opportunities within 3 years. I wrote in my last year of grad school grant that we ended up getting. So I postdoced on a project called Flood Rise, which was looking resilient. The RISE is an acronym, resilient infrastructure for and sustainable environments. So we were looking at how we could get people to care more about the storms that we knew were getting more frequent and more severe and weren't yet that much in 2014. Sucks to be right. But really looking, Flood Rise is still an active project at UC Irvine. Then I left Flood Rise and I got an appointment in the Department of Energy. I worked on the Sunshot team, which is an Obama initiative, to bring the cost of solar at grid parity with fossil fuels. And I was the Department of Energy's liaison to the White House Social and Behavioral Sciences team, which was a first of its kind team at the White House. That still exists in some format. That was also an Obama initiative. It's now called the Office of Evaluation Services. The name was changed in 2016 for reasons that we don't have to go into. And then after that, I went to the University of Southern California, and I was the first research director of a project called the Media Impact Project and at the Lear Center. And the Lear Center studies and shapes the impact of entertainment on society. And there I got to focus for 2 years on narrative and understanding how stories and storylines can impact issues that really matter. And I realized after these very different things that I can't sit still. And so the only way, and at some point, you start looking like really unhireable if you change jobs every year. So I realized the only thing I could do was start my own organization called Sea Change Institute, because I realized I just wanted to keep changing jobs and work on everything, and I would never get bored and get like not want to keep trying new and different things. So I started this small firm called Sea Change Institute. We're a behavior science research firm. And we work on research. We do strategy work, design and evaluation. We started the past couple of years doing a lot more training. I've just started as of this year. I'm back teaching. I'm at UC San Diego in a certificate program in sustainability and behavior change. Other professors in that program are other folks that John knows, Wes Schultz, Jennifer Tabanico, and really the idea is that we try and bring behavioral science as a tool in partnership with technology and with storytelling and with advertising, with organizations. We work with government organizations. We work with like cities and states and governments. We work with energy utilities. We work with nonprofits like Story of Stuff, Break Free from Plastic, foundations, and everywhere in between, to try and apply behavioral science. So that's a lot about me, but I hope it gives you an idea too of not just myself, but like kind of where the opportunity is and the way you can kind of forge your own path in this space. This was the last sentence in my applications to graduate school, and it's the motto of our company. We believe the role of research is not only to better understand the world, but also to improve it. And that's what my goal is to take nuggets from behavioral science and translate them into how can this insight improve the world, right? Like that insight that Beth Loftus, that can be used for great peril, or it can be used for good if we're careful. So on to my 4 thoughts. So I'm going to walk through, and each has kind of a behavioral science insight and then some practical application through either research I've conducted or a partner that I've worked with. That's how I try and do this. So first, keep it simple. This is so important because climate change is so complicated. There's some classic research going back to the 1950s that says this, a great article called The Magic Number 7 plus or minus 2, that says our brain can literally only hold about 7 plus or minus 2 data points at a time. So think about like phone numbers, social security numbers, zip codes, all these things we used to remember before cell phones, which means you might have never remembered them. I used to know everyone's phone number, like all my friends, my parents, because you had to. But it's hard for us to retain information. And the information in climate change is so complicated. Like understanding modeling. And so it's really important, depending when we're communicating for behavior change, when we're communicating out with a public who might not be interested, we want to drill down and simplify our message. I've over time evolved my thinking on this to distinguish between push messaging and pull, that when we're pushing out, like sending a tweet or sending an email, we want to stick with the 7 plus or minus 2. We want to be very simple, short, succinct, and then allow people who want more data, because if you oversimplify messaging, the critique can be people don't take it seriously. So we want to push out simple messaging with maybe a link or a click or a website or somewhere where people, or a conversation where people can get more. Right? But when you're sending that push message out, you want to make sure that we're distinguishing between precision and significance. There's really interesting research. This is not a talk about politics, but there is really interesting research that there's like differences. George Lakoff wrote a lot about the differences in traditionally conservative and liberal politics, that Democrats, liberals tend to really focus on precision, on getting the message right, and it can sometimes be overwhelming to people or they get lost. Whereas traditional conservatives, Republicans in this country focus on significant, simple, punchy framing. And they've won, and the Republicans have won messaging wars for a long time. And there's this really body of work in linguistics and message framing on this. And I think it's important that we, like I said, we don't want to oversimplify, but we do want to oversimplify in our first push and then make sure that there's that pull, that there's something where somebody who does want to get behind and go, well, how are you going to pay for those tax cuts? How do we make sure that we're more flood resilient the next time something hits the Asheville region, which is where I'm going in a few weeks for Thanksgiving. So that's where my partner's from, right? Like, how do we do this? You want to start with a simple message. We can do it. We need $1 million. We need this bond passed, and then click here for more information. A great example of this is an organization that I worked with for a number of years, from, I don't need to date myself. Well, 9 to 13, I think. And this organization was started, there was a woman named Annie Leonard who worked at the Sierra Club. I'm forgetting. Sierra Club, I think. And she was very focused on our relationship to the material goods economy, and just how the material goods economy was really environmentally destructive. And she gave this talk on why we need a paradigm shift in our relationship to the material goods economy. And she would go out and give these PowerPoint talks on why we need a paradigm shift with our relationship to the material goods economy. And by the time she would finish saying paradigm shift with our relationship to material goods economy, half the audience was on their phones. Maybe there weren't phones back then. No, there were. We had cell phones back then. And so she thought to herself, like, how do I simplify this? How do I make this message more compelling? Because this is so important and people are tuning out. And so she got a grant from the Tide Foundation. She partnered with a narrative agency. I'm forgetting the agency, but it was led by a guy named Jonah Sachs. And they took all this amazing scientific content and they translated it into the story of stuff, which is a lot easier to say than we need a paradigm shift with our relationship to material goods economy. And it was a black and white cartoon with Annie's little colored body kind of inserting in. And the first story of stuff is amazing.
Pause for 1 sec, Beth. How
Yeah.
many people have seen Story of Stuff? Just want to get a sense of
Yeah.
it. Okay, so I always show it in my one-on-one classes, but it seems like we have 4 or 5 people. Who
I highly recommend it. The first one is what? It's like 15 minutes, 20 minutes.
It is absolutely brilliant. If you want to think about communication, you have got to watch Story of Stuff. It's one of the most brilliant pieces of communication about consumerism and material flow that you will ever see.
And and an example of how to simplify complexity without reducing it. Like, I mean, it's simplified, but you learn something very complicated in a very simple way. They've gone on to make, I think they've seen over, it's been seen, last time I checked, like 50 million times. They have 11 other films now. My favorite
is very impressive.
What?
Translated into multiple different languages.
Yeah. And actually, those translations all came from people who saw it and offered. I don't think they paid for a single translation. I remember hearing that when I worked with them. And so they ended up making a number. My favorite actually is the story of change, which is, I'm gonna not lie, I collaborated with them to turn the story of change into a quiz and then a course. But it was based on this idea. They started hearing that people were like, well, I want to support the environment, but I don't want to be an environmentalist. Like, I'm not a protester. I don't want to hold a sign. And so it was all about what kind of change maker are you? And you can watch this and learn about all these different types of change makers and like, are you a nurturer? Are you an investigator? Like, we don't all have to be the people that chain ourselves to trees. That's one of my favorites. But yes, all of their films, they're still a successful organization. 8 years after this film, Annie went back to, I think it is the Sierra Club.
I think
This
she's
time
Greenpeace, I think.
Greenpeace. Thank you. Not Sierra Club, Greenpeace. Yes,
Yeah.
Greenpeace. She went back to Greenpeace a decade later, and now she's the executive director there. But the organization lives on. So this is a great example of keeping it simple, really keeping, again, this in mind, like what is significant in my message? We fall in love with our science and we lose people. So this is like a key thing. I think I've sufficiently made myself clear that I think this is very important. So next, use a story structure. I love story structures. So I mentioned this. I worked in a center that studied media and television shows and film. And I started realizing even before, I mean, that's part of why I started working with organizations like Story of Struth, because I wanted to figure out who was getting climate messaging right. And then I felt like in the aughts, not very many people were getting climate change right. So then I thought, who's getting messaging and storytelling right? And so I just started studying storytelling. And I realized like people who go to film school, right? Like they learn how to construct how to tell a story, how to keep people engaged. Like, why aren't we learning from storytellers? So I'm going to share. So first of all, stories, there's really interesting research. And now fMRI data, we see this brain science that's telling us what I think we've always known, which is we're literally hardwired for stories. Different parts of our brain, when people hear the same information in a story, in a narrative structure, as opposed to expository, fact-based, more of our brain lights up and the emotional part of our brain lights up and the part of our brain that aids memory, that retains, lights up. Literally, stories are soaked in. If you think of the brain as a sponge, more of your brain is activated and takes in the information. There's also research that shows that stories in self-report, again, giving somebody the same information in like bullet points or a story, people find stories more interesting, understandable, believable. And this is important. And that's why this article about the ethical considerations of using narrative, more persuasive. We can persuade better using a story than just information. And I think this has gotten so much better in my career. Climate change still struggles sometimes with stories. A lot of our stories are like bummer, stat, bad, you should do something, roll credits. And that is not, if you look at story structures, very effective. So, or maybe I love this, one of my favorite social scientists, maybe stories are just data with a soul. And we are filled with data about how bad things are. And sometimes data about optimism and solutions, but stories just allow us to put that soul in. So when we're communicating, I'm going to share a few. First, story structure, I'm going to share 3. First, classic Aristotelian dramatic art. So this goes back thousands of years. And this is like the classic 3-act structure, or a 5-part story that you start with exposition, set the context. Now, this, yes, did apply to plays, movies, but we can apply this to our work in campaigning and giving talks. Set the stage, exposition, background. This is how many storms there have been. They've been increasing, blah, blah, blah. Rising action. I think this is a great way to tell the story of research. I came up with a research question. How might we get people to take more protective action towards floods in their area? And then we start seeing crisis. Things start happening and things go right and things go wrong because that's life. And then there's a climax and then falling action. So something ends up in a movie. There might be 2 people on the top of a roof with a weapon, but in our world, it might be like our data set is kind of a mess, or we learn something new, or we don't, or we go to COP and we finally get there and we get our opportunity, give that big speech, and then some sort of resolution. So this is a classic arc that has been modernized by Joseph Campbell in the middle of the 20th century as the hero's journey. Tons of films, almost any sci-fi film you've ever seen follows a hero's journey. Again, you can think of that as a scientist, as an activist, that we are called to adventure. I love the hero's journey instead of telling your own story. If you flip it around, if you're doing any sort of advocacy or campaigning, let them be the hero, the person whose door you're knocking on, not your door, right? Let the people that you're trying to solicit to get involved in your campaign or buy your product or participate in your clean air day. We're advising on San Diego's clean air day right now. Like, let the people that we're inviting to bike to work that day be the heroes. And the hero is somebody who's called to living a normal life and called to adventure. They cross the threshold. They have challenges and temptations. There's usually some dark moment, right? And then the atonement, transformation, and then again this return, this denouement, and we end up back the same as how we were, but a little bit different, right? And this is a great story structure that can be used not just in action films, but in any of our communication. Second, this story structure was identified by Nancy Duarte, who founded an organization called Duarte Design that really focuses on PowerPoint talks. They trained and worked with Al Gore and a lot of early TED speakers on their talks. And she studied great speeches, and she gave a talk about talks called The Secret Structure of Great Talks, where she found a pattern in great speeches. Martin Luther King's I Have a Dream speech, the Gettysburg Address. And she found this consistent pattern between them that looked a lot like this. And if you're not sure what you're seeing right here, I can translate it. This is what it was. And similar, there was this expository. You can see this setting the groundwork, right? The gap. So that's like starting with like that what do you call here? Exposition, right? And then it turns into, and she said, you need to go back and forth between what is and what can be. If we just bummer call to action, brains don't like bummer call to action, because when brains hear bummer and bummer, they start to tune out, right? So what we do is we switch between things are bad right now, but here's a vision of what could be. If you think of Martin Luther King's I Have a Dream speech, right now, children are segregated, but it doesn't have to be this way. Right now, this is how it is. It doesn't have to be this way. So when you think about climate change, if you're doing, this is, like I said, kind of oration, she studied speeches and translated it to PowerPoint talks, but you could also do this in any sort of communication or casual conversation. But the key is that we're manipulating emotion, that we're not keeping people in a down. This keeps people engaged and interested. Think about like movies, this whole controversy. I don't know if you're following this, the controversy of The Bear. It's being nominated in the comedy category for an Emmy, and it's like just this dark, sad show, because great comedies have pathos and great dramas have comedy, right? Like, we have to do both. Anything that's just straight up one thing won't keep people engaged for a long time. And it's the same thing with climate communication. Yes, it's kind of a bummer right now, for sure, but we have to be connecting to this purpose. There's a book right now that's out, just came out, Ayanna Johnson, who wrote a book called What If We Get It Right? It is epic. It is beautiful. It is so well curated. You can just pick it up and open to a chapter. It's like an anthology of her interviewing and talking to people and ideas of what if we get it right. And it does this perfectly. It's a book, but it does what Nancy Duarte is talking about. It says, here's some data on how bad it is. What if we get it right? Here's what could be. And then after a little bit of this back and forth between bummer, hope, bummer, hope, bummer, hope, then call to action, then say, and if you ... then, and then there's this reward, new bliss, then we can together address these changes, see a better future for our children, blah, blah, blah. One more. Third story structure. And this one came out of actual door-to-door organizing. So the first came out of like theater, drama, great philosophy. The second was really studying speeches. This was a guy named Marshall Gans at Harvard who decided to he went to California and started working with Cesar Chavez and the migrant farm workers movement, because they were getting support from the public, from white people, from non-immigrants, to support farm worker rights, which had not happened. He was like, how are they getting traction? And so he studied and he found that there was an arc to the way that Cesar Chavez and his organizers would talk to people. And it looked like this. There was a 3-part arc: the story of self, the story of us, and the story of now. And those three each have a little piece. So the story of self start with, hi, my name is Beth, and my name is Beth, and I spent my 20s living in the wilderness, showing kids how beautiful nature is, right? Something personal and interesting about yourself, and like, why should people listen to you, right? What's your qualifier? And it doesn't have to be a qualification. It could be a personal characteristic. Then the story of us, find common ground, connect. And like you, I care about the future and I care about leaving this world better for our children, right? Or like you, I love to be outdoors and I think nature is worth saving. So you start with this personal piece, then find common ground. This model was applied, Marriage Equality USA, that movement in the aughts, like followed, worked with the New Organizing Institute. There have a lot of movements in years since that have kind of applied this, and it's really popular. A lot of political campaigns train their canvassers on this. And then the story of now, present the call to action. But you don't go straight to, can you sign my petition? You don't stop the person walking out of Trader Joe's and being like, do you care about whales? Right? Like, if you can get them, you want to say like, hi, my name's so-and-so. I blah, 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 something about me, something that connects us. We all fill in the blank. And then I'd like you to, as a result, I'd like you to, if you care as well, please. And so again, this story is focused on advocacy. I've actually done a ton of trainings, which I love, in organizations using this structure for people to introduce themselves at conferences. Because so many of us, like me when I met John, if we're giving a talk, we practice our slides, we have notes, we know exactly what to say. And then you're sitting at the coffee and somebody goes, hey, my name's John, who are you? And you just freeze. I'm grad student to bathroom, right? Like, we don't know what to say. And so I think it's really important not to script yourself, but to have a pulse point. Think about when you go to an event or a conference or a workshop or a wedding where there might be like friends of your parents that might be able to help you get a job when you finish, to go, hi, I'm this. This is what I'm studying. This is who I am, what I'm about. I care about, I'm really excited to be here because, so at a conference, like, hi, I'm Beth. This is who I am. I come from, I come from Sea Change. Something interesting about me, something about why I'm at the conference. Like you, I'm at this conference because I think linking behavior and climate change is just like the most important thing we can be doing. And I'm here, and come up with a call to action when you go somewhere, especially a professional. I'm here to learn more specifically about the IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act, and how it might be changing the game in electrification and climate change. I'm here to network with other people in the West Coast so that I can expand my local network. I'm here to, and figure it out, present a call to action, because it's amazing, especially in this space, in this climate change, energy, environment space. Everyone's so mutually supportive. We are not competitive. So if you show up and you're like, I'm at this conference because I want to learn, and not gonna lie, I'm looking for a job in a year, people will open up their networks to you. People will be so kind. So don't be afraid to do that. I love this one for like literally any conversation, getting out there where you could potentially offer some support and also get some help. So that's story structures. Next, connect the dots. So now we're going back to kind of keep it simple. I talked about like, keep it simple, don't over communicate, try and reduce as much as you can. Sometimes you can't do that though. Sometimes information is complex. Sometimes you are looking out at the night sky and you can't make there be less stars, right? So what do we do? I changed my slide too soon. What do? We can't reduce the number of stars. How do we make that information easier for our brains to process, right? We connect the dots. This is an ancient technology. This is not something that somebody wrote a paper about 10 years ago, right? Like constellations. We look for patterns. Patterns help us recognize and make sense of complexity. We have been doing this for as long as we have had language, right? So there's many ways to do this. So this is a great strategy when communicating climate change, because there are all these things that don't always seem connected. So making sure that we're connecting the dots. A few ways of thinking about connecting the dots. One is called perceptual assistance. That's what this is. Perceptual assistance is when you have more than 7 ± 2 data points that you create patterns. So this is an example of a study I ran with another friend and colleague who actually still works with me to this day at Sea Change, Becky Ford. I met at Beck when she was finishing her PhD at Oxford, and we were really interested in residential energy feedback and giving people information. And the smart meters had shown that once we installed these smart meters, we could give super granular data, but that data could overwhelm people. We were so used to getting one data point a month. You use this many kilowatt hours in October. So what if we could start giving people information about their energy use by day? And so I thought we'd give 7 plus or minus 2, which is a week, and then more than that, which is a month. And most likely we'd be giving back information to people and bills. Most utilities were thinking, could we give people daily energy use? And I thought, but that's not 7 plus or minus 2. So we did an experiment. People were randomly assigned to one of these conditions where they got the 7, the 30, with or without perceptual assistance. The perceptual assistance here was changing the color of bars for the weekends. And so what we found was when you went from 7 to 30, you had an attenuation of interest in the image and ability to process. When you went to the right, when you added perceptual assistance, with 7, the bars didn't help at all, but with 30, they really did. And the bottom right, the month with perceptual assistance, was the most effective message in terms of people saying, I'm interested in looking at it. I want to use it. If my bill had it, I would look at it. And they could answer the most correct questions about their energy use based on it. A couple other ways to connect the dots. Metaphor. I love metaphor. This one's a little dated now. It's still one of my favorites that came out of the COVID era, right? Like, how do masks works? Well, think if you were peeing on somebody, wouldn't it help if you wore pants? Like if they wore pants that would protect them, and if you wore pants that would protect them, and if you both wore pants, then like that's great. Nobody has pee on them. It's crass, but it really helps you understand masks, right? So there's lots of ways when we talk about like, there's been some research out of an organization called Frameworks. If you're interested in who's doing the best work, I think, on earth on the power of metaphor, they're called Frameworks Institute. They won the MacArthur Genius Award. They do work not just on climate change, on all sorts of issues, but they did research that found that using the metaphor of a heat trapping blanket to describe our atmosphere and carbon was really helpful. So they look at like how can we develop and build metaphor? Another way that I think is so important in climate change is to connect the dots between action and outcome. A lot of people say they don't take action. They don't vote. People who don't vote, people who don't volunteer, people who don't take action on climate change is not because they don't know what to do. It's because they don't think it'll matter. Connect the dots between action and outcome. That is essential. People need a sense of self-efficacy, of behavioral efficacy, something I can do it, can I do it? And response efficacy, will it matter? We spend a lot of time telling people about all these things they should do, shoulding on people without giving them sufficient information about the impact. And then make sure that the behaviors that you're asking about are ones that are reasonable, that are feasible. So this is an example of a climate-based message that climate-based, health-based, cruelty-based, depending on your thoughts on animal consumption, but very climate related. But this is Susie Cameron, her husband, James Cameron, famously made Avatar and a whole bunch of other movies. They became vegan. She ran a school and she realized that not everyone was going to become vegan. She wants everyone to be a vegan, but she realized she's a vegan. But she realized telling people to be vegan, not everyone would do that. So instead, she wrote a book called One Meal a Day, and instead identified a behavior that more people felt like they could do. Replace one meal a day with a plant-based meal. No animals, 1 meal a day, no milk, no meat, no cheese, whatever, no eggs. Just one person eating one plant-based meal a day. And then she connected that to outcome, right? We'll save almost 20 gallons of water. She also used metaphor here, right? The equivalent of driving, the equivalent carbon of driving. So she compared meat consumption, the carbon, to driving, right? Which we can understand a lot better. We know, we can think about how much gas we would put in our car to drive from Los Angeles to New York. So you have a physical idea in your head. Then I just added this one because John was like, I don't know. You were like, put more climate change stuff in here. And I have one more example, I think, of a really interesting study we did about medium. So I talked a lot. All of this is on messaging, 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 messaging. It's important to get your messaging right, but it's also important to think about how you're sharing it. I've done a lot of work on like who, like influencers, who you're communicating through. This study actually was done with Frontline, which is a TV show. Does anybody watch 2020 Frontline? PBS NewsHour. It's a television show, news show. And they started experimenting with virtual reality. And they were like, what if we would taking some of our stories and creating them in VR, in 360 video, would that enhance people's engagement in these topics and likelihood? And we actually studied two. One was on solitary confinement in prison, and then one was on climate change. And a lot of VR studies before me, a lot of these studies just took VR and they compared it to like not VR. But I was really interested in this variable of immersivity. How immersive is the video experience? So we had the exact same video, the exact same cut, and we had people either watch it on a laptop computer. Can you hear me okay? Just said my internet stable. Okay. They either watched it on a laptop computer and they could still, it was still a little interactive. They could use their keyboard or in room scale VR in an HTC 5. We did another one where we added in like just headset. But in this one, we just had those two. And so it's the same content. And the only difference is the technology, the medium, the level of immersivity of the experience. And like does the same exact information second per second change? Does the impact change? And so we did a pre-survey. So we did pre-post, we did pre-survey, then they had one or the other, and then a post-survey. But we were also interested in some qualitative insights. So then we had them do the other one that they did. Also, we were recruiting people to like drive across LA and come in. And we did give them like 20 bucks or something, but people came because they wanted to do VR. So we realized the people in the video condition would be really bummed if they left without the VR. So we gave everyone both, and then we did an interview. And so here's what we found really quick. So I want to leave some time for conversation. So we found on all these variables of likability, transportation, emotional transportation, spatial presence, feeling like I'm there, feeling connected to the content, really enjoying the experience. All of these were significantly, nobody's shocked, were significantly higher for the room scale experience, having the headset in. Ease of use a little bit higher, but there was also, it's hard to use those sometimes. We also asked about other things. We asked about their perception of credibility. It didn't change at all because it was the same information. We also wanted to look at how are they taking in the information and learning. And we found, because this can be used as an educational tool, and we found really interestingly that the people who could answer questions correctly went down when they saw VR. So they were far more into it, but they actually took in less. And there was a statistically significant difference here, right? That like answering the question about height of sea level rise, we asked 3 questions and all 3 of them, they underperformed in the VR. So this immersivity, this interactivity takes away in some ways our ability to retain. What matters more? I'm not going to say one or the other. It depends on your goals. If you're doing educational content, this room scale decreases retention. But if you're trying to engage people to take action, it's possible that VR does. So we asked about, oh, I didn't have the last one. Okay, I'll just tell you. We did ask about intention to take action. So if that's your goal, so we realized if your goal of this engagement is for them to learn, it's attenuated, means it goes down. If your goal is to get them to do something, we did ask about behavioral intent. We asked a series of questions. Which of these are you likely to do after where they saw one or the other? And we found that no significant differences. So when you think about the significantly increased cost of VR and the decreased reach, if your goal is behavior change, the jury is still out on VR. I would say, pretty unquestionably, the cost per vote or per signature, whatever, per converted person is significantly higher for VR right now than it is for video. That doesn't mean we throw the baby out with the bathwater. It just means we need to keep looking at what it's good for. And it's same with Instagram, with TikTok, with all these methods. There's things that just seem cool and we want to jump to them, but really thinking about what's the bang for your buck? What's the cost per vote, the cost per signature, the cost per whatever your outcome is. And I know this all feels overwhelming. This is just the tip of the iceberg. Conferences like Back, Behavior, Energy, Climate Change, there's just days and days of things. The thing I want to leave you with is that behavioral science provides this rich ongoing body of evolving and emerging insights. And we can use those as a superpower. We can take these insights and apply them to make the world a better place to address climate change issues. With that, I'll take the rest of the time we have left for questions or conversation.
Thanks, Beth. The floor is open. Go for it, Cecilia.
My question was about media, and if there's any media that you've seen in like the last 10 years that you think portrayed climate change in an effective method that would make people care.
Yeah. There certainly have been some attempts. I mean, I think so I like to think of, I don't think one story is going to do it. I think there are different types. There's this group called Active Voice. If you look up, I think they might have disbanded, but they still have information. Active Voice, they came up with this concept of horticulture tools, like a rake and a hoe and a shovel. And I think different stories have different goals. And I think it's important. So I would say Don't Look Up was a great example of a narrative film that did well. It made money, and not box office, was Netflix, but like it was a successful entertainment piece of media that raised awareness. Did it talk a lot about actions and solutions? No, it wasn't even about climate change, right? It was about the asteroid, but it was a metaphor. And I think it got the conversation going. And I think it did that successfully. It didn't lead to tangible behavior change, but that wasn't its goal. The goal, Adam McKay's goal, was to make a good movie that people would watch, that would kind of put in our face how bad this is. And it did that. Then I think there are other, I mean, I think the Story of Stuff is an amazing example, but Story of Stuff is rarely, if not never, going to be seen by people who have no interest in climate change or believe it's a hoax, right? Where Don't Look Up reached a broader audience. There's a lot of great content. And I think and then there's projects that go really deep. I worked on a 20-minute documentary about straws called Straws. And it was just about plastic straws. Now, some of us could argue that plastic straws are really not a distraction and not something we should be talking about. But it also, I find little actions, getting people to engage in small individual actions like not using plastic straws, to engage our identity as climate activists, and then we can take more action on a larger scale. So I think so you can look at, I think there are some great documentaries in its moment. Inconvenient Truth was everything. I mean, it really created a conversation. It also politicized climate change. I think because it was Al Gore. I think there's polling that suggests that climate change, that it became more supported by Democrats and less by Republicans. So there was a shadow to that. Extrapolations, really controversial. I thought it beat us over the head a little bit, but Extrapolations was lauded as the first climate change narrative television show. It was on Apple. I don't know. It was good. Somebody say, what was it on?
I was just asking who in the room had seen Extrapolations, because I haven't, and I think no one here said they saw it. Is that true?
Nobody?
Yeah.
Oh, is there one hand? No, nobody has.
No.
It's, how many of you saw Don't Look Up though? So do you see the difference? So more hands. So Don't Look Up didn't bill itself as climate, but it got people, it got a conversation going. Extrapolations came out as the first climate change television show, and none of you watched it.
Right.
There's a doc that, what's his name? Zac Efron did, where he goes around the world talking about climate solutions. I forget. That one was pretty good. But yeah, actually my favorite one, it's a British woman comedian, did a climate change travel show. Has anyone seen that one?
Is that what is it? Something on Earth?
Yes.
Oh, I've heard of it.
Y'all, so good. She's hilarious. So good. So those are a few. And
It's
just a way to
called
think about it
I
is something on Earth.
I don't want to mispronounce the word, because it is similar to a word that is derogatory towards women, but I don't want to.
Is that what it was? We can find it. I can find it, and it was so funny. Yeah, I can look for it. What else?
Josette, you had a question.
Yeah, so I was really thinking about, with talking about the story of self, us, and now, my brain kind of went to people in the street who try to get you to donate or sign up for things, and I have just noticed that they very often do not do that, and they just kind of are do you care about this, and people just keep walking past them. And so I was wondering if you've observed this at all, and your thoughts on improving that, because it can be, a meaningful way to get
Yeah.
things done.
Yeah, I mean, depending on the issue, like I've seen really great research. So like a good friend of mine from college was the executive director of Marriage Equality USA. So I watched really closely. They took this model and worked with the New Organizing Institute. And they actually even broke down within the research, they found that that the best, and like looking at like door-to-door canvassing calling, that actually um family members of gay people were more effective than gay people. So like, hi, I'm so and so, and I wasn't sure how I felt about, you know, and somebody honestly being like, I don't know, like I'd never thought about it, and then my daughter came out, and now I realize that she has the same rights that I do, and that everyone does, and blah blah. This sounds so ancient now. We've evolved so much in such a short amount of time when our social issues, like, right, John? If you think back to like, I was just in my 25-year college reunion, and we were like, wow, like kids were not out when we were in college. Like, and now, but anyways, so like between then and now, right, this was a big issue. And they found that like sometimes that the most effective person knocking was somebody who said like their self, their me, we, and now. I call it self, us, and now. Me, we, and now was great when they were like, I didn't know a lot about gay rights, and I didn't think a lot about gay marriage until my sister, cousin, parent, child, whatever came out, and now. And so I do think like there's ways we can study that and think about like what's the best message. We don't want it to ever feel so much like a script that it's not authentic, because the goal of Me, We, and Now is to connect. But yes, I think for any issue, you can find what's that through line, what's the universal, and what's the specific. So the specific for the person in Marriage Equality USA is I'm gay, or my son's gay, or my cousin's gay, or queer, or whatever now. Like, but and then the us is, and like you, I think everyone has a right to be happy. I want my family to be happy. We all deserve love, right? And then you get to your call to action. So depending, I don't think you can say climate change, flood resilience, mitigation, Inflation Reduction Act, like fine for any given issue that you're advocating on. If you're saving the polar bears, the Me, We, Now might be very different than if you're advocating for increased solar funding, right? So you want to think through for that issue and then try and test the messages before. If you're going out and like training hundreds of people to go out at Trader Joe's or door knock or call, like test your messages and then train based on the ones that work.
Sammy, you had a question.
I do, yeah. I read about, and you mentioned your experience working in like a number of roles in K through 12 schools. I was wondering if you've like promoted or worked on like promoting sustainability within schools specifically, something.
My last job before grad school, we did a little bit. So one thing I did, I worked in 3 different places, 3 different K-12 schools. The first had a community service program, and then the second and the third, I developed them. That wasn't climate specific, but just the idea of getting young people, having a requirement for high school students to graduate. And then in the second school I developed a travel program, so a volunteer travel program. So just to engage people in just thinking bigger, altruism more broadly, and thinking bigger than themselves. And then the last school I worked at, we built a school garden program. And I think, again, like, I think a climate change, and we worked on adding climate units. Like I worked with that one was K-6, and I worked with the teachers in each grade to figure out where and identify climate-based and energy and environment. So like in 4th grade, I think at the time was water. And so I'd find a curriculum, a water conservation curriculum, and offer it to the 4th grade teachers. And 5th grade was energy, so energy efficiency. But I'm a big fan, as I said, of experiential. So like creating a school garden, and Alice Waters, who's a very famous chef, Chez Panisse in Berkeley, she also started the slow food movement and the school garden movement. And the idea of one of the ways of educating about like our nature, right? Part of like climate education, environmental education is like there's a huge relationship between our connectedness to nature and our understanding of natural processes and systems. And if we understand what's natural, then we can start to understand what's not. So I think school gardens are an epic way to introduce young people into climate change, even though it's like the don't look up versus the extrapolations, right? It's meeting them where we are. It's that slide I showed at the beginning of the overlapping circles. So when I took my ASB on our retreat every year out to the mountains, and we like hiked, that was me introducing them to nature in my way, because that wasn't a climate change job, but it was my way of like trying to integrate that into everything I did. Because in movies, like we talked about, don't look up extrapolations, and also in education, if you come off as too activist, then there can be more pushback within the educational system than if you kind of like link it in as natural of ways as possible, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's great.
We have room for one more question, and it's gonna be Lou.
Well, does anyone else have anything, or?
You go,
Okay,
Lou.
thank you so much. This was an awesome talk. I've worked previously as an interpretive specialist in zoos, and something that we have focused on there a lot has been advancing conservation through empathy. So I was really interested by like what you were telling about with the telling a story part, because when I was there, I got trained to be able to increase visitors' connections with an animal in order to then help make them, just help inspire them about different ways that they can help better share this planet with these creatures. So I'm wondering, with what you're focusing on with experiential learning, I'm thinking about how like that setting provided a really in zoos provided a really interesting way, like really interesting opportunities to apply the what I now look back on as kind of the self us now model. So I'm just wondering, have you done anything with like looking at the setting that you're doing messaging in?
Yes. So yes. So I kind of talked about that a second before I got into VR, that I said we've done research looking at the messenger, but that like so much focuses on the message and all of that, the context. I'll say a couple of things. There's some great research that I did not, but friends of John and I have done, and it's called NEOCI, the National Network for Ocean and Climate Change Interpretation, NNOCCI. Janet Swim, Nate Geiger, John Fraser, Frameworks Institute was a partner. So it started as an NSF grant, and then they did another NSF grant. I don't know if they're still active, but their website's still up. They had at least 6 years of funding, and that's what they built out some of the earliest zoo and aquarium training on climate change. I also worked on a project with Johnny Fraser at Parks, where we worked with a PBS affiliate to develop new, like the park visitor center videos that historically would just say like, this is a cool thing to look at, and this is a cool thing to look at. Because when you go visit a park, you want the visitor center to just tell you about cool things to look at. And we were like, what if we put climate change messaging and environmental messaging into the park videos? And I actually had a summer when I was in grad school where I drove around and went to different national parks or state and national parks in California. And like we did an experiment where they'd see the old video and the new video, and we like interviewed them. And it was such a fun summer job that I got paid to go camping. So there's a lot on that. There's also some really great research out of the Center for Climate Change Education at Yale, and the one at George Mason collaborated on, they've been doing work with newscasters and how can newscasters integrate talks of climate in when they talk about a flood. Is there a way to do that without backlash, right? And so there's a lot of really interesting research finding these natural gathering places. And there's even some work, I'm forgetting what it's called. A friend of ours who actually we lost way too early to cancer, Dina Biscotti, was doing research on faith-based communities. Interfaith Green Alliance is the organization, and they work with clergy on how to bring climate messaging into faith-based, into their sermons. So there's a lot of work in this space, and I think that's one of the best, because if you give on, this is 3 different questions. I've kind of come back to the same thing, right? If your climate messaging has climate in all caps, you're gonna preach the choir, right? You're gonna get people who are interested. That's not bad, because you're not preaching to the choir, you're training and deploying the choir. It's okay to do climate messaging that only climate people will follow. And in the ecosystem, it's also important for us to find the don't look ups, the zoo visitors, the ways that we can bring climate to people in settings where they're going, right? And that's those circles, right? Where are they? What are they interested in? What are you interested in? The better we can do that, zoos, there's so much cool stuff going on at zoos. And it's a great zoos, weathercasters, churches, there's all these places, television shows where we can make sure we see an increase in climate change messaging so that it becomes more normative, so that more people do go to the documentaries or go to the Story of Stuff type projects and get more information, and then obviously take action.
Well, Beth, thank you so much. We have now exceeded our hour of time with you. I just, another moment of appreciation for Beth here. Yeah.
Thank you, everyone. And I'll just say before I leave, happy Halloween
Yes.
and go Dodgers, because we won the World Series last night.
Yes.
All right, thanks everyone. Have a good one, John. I'll talk to you soon.
Take care. Bye. All right. I'm gonna leave this thing running because we got a couple people missing today, and I want to do what I'm going to do whenever we have a guest speaker in this class. Can you yank that up so we get a little bit more daylight? I don't think we need lights on here, but gotta wake you guys up. Stand up for a second, stretch. I want to do a little go round, and what I'm gonna ask everyone to do is to just share a thought on something Beth said that you think is relevant to either your project and the work you're doing this semester, or that you feel like is particularly relevant to some other project that you know is taking place in this class. So we'll just do a circle and give everyone a chance to say something, and if you want to pass, you can pass, and we can start with anyone. And okay, good. We've got Josette who's anxious to go. Do it.
Okay, well, I think this is really big for my project, and Pranav and I just talking about redeveloping the Science Center display case, and thinking about how we want to communicate what we're communicating, and I think that's something that we've been thinking about as we revise our proposal. And I think really everything Beth said will be super helpful, especially in storytelling. I think that'll be really big.
That's great. Let's make sure when we're at the case on Friday that we revisit that thought, that we intentionally revisit that thought. Okay, it's gonna be Luke or Lily next, and that'll determine which way we go. Who
I
wants to
could go next.
Okay.
Something I was thinking about, what?
Nothing, you beat me to the punch.
Okay, she was talking about how talking about the migrant farm workers movement and Cesar Chavez and things like that, where they realized that the way they spoke to people about the issues they were fighting for was very compelling, and the self us now strategy. And yeah, that just made me yeah, and then the other thing she was talking about just these different storytelling methods that can be used in just talking to people or giving presentations and things like that. It just kind of brought up a lot of ideas for me about how to just make your conversations with people more compelling and more encouraging them to think in certain ways.
I'm gonna try not to directly respond to people, but I have to say, I was spending a lot of time thinking about community voices and thinking explicitly about when she talked about the power of individual works, the A broken light versus the broken light, and how much difference that makes. It was making me think about how important that fine tuning is of those to help get the message right. But I was also thinking on the me, we, now thing. Can you pack a me, we, now into a community voices quote? Was one of the things I was thinking about. Can you get all that in there? I think you can, honestly. I think it's doable if you think about it really carefully about how you get me, we, now into one quote. I think it's doable. Sadie, you're up.
I think something that could work well for my group, or for my project, is not making everything seem too negative, because in order to make the students realize why this is important, we'll have to explain that climate change is a problem. But if we make it seem like a problem that they can't, if we make it too doom and gloom and that they can't really take action, then it'll kind of make all the work we're doing moot, because our whole thing is about motivating the students to take action.
Yeah, that's interesting. So thinking hard about the efficacy side of things, where is the empowerment to do something? And communicating the importance, as she said too, of the importance of that action. How's that action gonna make a difference? Like, so people might know, yeah, I could buy this different light bulb, but I don't think it's gonna make any difference. Cool.
I think that the part where she's talking about modes of communication and different methods of it can be effective for our project, and to gauge if students are like, because she's talking how VR was like more engaging, but they weren't able to answer the questions as well. So I wonder if if students will be engaged and also like be able to answer questions about like their building resource use. And like not related to this project, but just in general, like I've always been like fascinated by how like entertainment has been like pushing more like climate related messaging, and like seeing that I think like storytelling is really effective, and maybe using like a story method in our presentation and Kendall like we're presenting our findings will be effective to like engage the audience. So
Thinking about some of these ideas about how you incorporate them into your presentations is what you're thinking. How do you build that stuff into your presentation? That's a good thing, not just your project, but your presentation. I like that a lot.
I was actually, so for the set story display, I was thinking off of what Melly just said. I like didn't originally connect to anything with the VR thing, but now I'm thinking, you know, if we overcomplicate the display, it could be more engaging, but allow less retention. And then my point before that was similar, that in her first point, keep it simple with the push-pull framework, you know, the first push has to be more simple, and then we have to give an option for it to get more complex, which reminds me of some of the comments on the presentation yesterday.
Some of our discussion about how many chapters, for instance.
Yeah,
I was
I
thinking
was
about
gonna talk
that
about
for
that.
sure. Yeah,
Yeah, sorry, are we just sharing?
we're just sharing, yeah.
Yeah, I was really interested in the story part. I was trying to think about how we could have relate this to our own projects, and I like remember like in your comments for the Cleveland like project proposal, you like added in this I guess it's not really a story, but like the river fire. I forgot what it was called, but like that as
When
like
the Cuyahoga burned, yeah.
yeah, as like kind of like a story and like a call to action, but like something that's very like tangible and not just like some sort of like presentation we're doing. And like I don't know how we could put that in presentations, but something about like some sort of like urgency of environmental education through like a more like a narrative form, I guess.
Yeah, no, I like where you're going with that. I mean, the river, the Cuyahoga River catching on fire is this sort of it's a big narrative within the environmental movement. You guys might not be aware of that just because it's so many generations later. You are aware of it.
It's like it's what retained this image. And we go to college in Ohio.
It basically is what inspired the Clean Water Act. The Clean Water Act was a response to Cuyahoga River catching on fire. Like when water catches on fire, it catches people's attention. And then the narrative of about you can swim in it now, people fish and eat the fish out of it now, kayak in it. You wanna say something?
No, continue. I have something once you're done.
I'm done, I'm good.
Like, yeah, that is significant, but also one thing that I just noticed or I thought of was when Beth was talking about the significance is more motivating than precision. I find it interesting that the image of the Cuyahoga River that is so commonly used to describe it is like when it caught on fire, and the image that appeared in stories in like newspapers isn't from that year, it's from an earlier fire,
No,
because
it
the
caught on
Cuyahoga
fire
fire
annually.
caught on
Yeah, right.
it caught on fire multiple
Yeah,
times.
it did indeed.
But I'm just thinking like, that's a pretty big example of like, people think of it as that one fire and then that's.
Right, well, there's a lot in that. Let's come back to that, but we're gonna keep going here, yeah, Jane.
Yeah, I really liked that talk, and I thought, she really drove home the importance of stories, and when she was talking about self, us now, I was honestly thinking about like how I could apply that to like my other communications class. But to stay on topic, I think, yeah, the whole 7 ± 2, I think like the opportunities to apply that to this SIP dashboard are, you know, there's quite a few. And yeah, I was gonna mention the whole long conversation we had with Maddie on Zoom the other day about like how many chapters should we put in each like story. And according to this presentation, 5 and 6 we're good
Well,
answers.
that is what we were pretty much settling on, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, kind of what other people have said, I've thought a lot about keeping it simple and like providing the right amount of information that gets people engaged, but not too much and not too little that it seems like we're oversimplifying anything. And also like her final thought about like finding ways to bring climate messaging to people where they are. So like how do we get people engaged with this, with like how do we get people engaged with this display that maybe are not always thinking about climate action?
Right, so going back to Josette's thought, I'm definitely thinking myself about like, we need to carefully think about like the target audiences for that. And I mean audiences because it's not one target audience, you know, it's people passing by who are never gonna go through Oberlin College again. It's people who go into the Science Center every single day. And how are we thinking about these different audiences for that case? You know, and what's gonna be meaningful to them, and, you know, trying to create some content that works for different audiences, not feeling like there's one audience, but yeah.
I was fascinated when you started talking about the story of, well, different stories. I'm fascinated in storytelling because I was trained on the story, I wrote this in the document, the story of self, us, and now when doing things for Sunrise Movement. And so what's interesting is how she talked about it in here in the context of all other stories. And I feel like our project could be useful for just even like simple communications, like when we're doing the script for what we're talking to people as, when we're introducing the project, and like, hey, I'm Max, Jasmine, and we're doing this. This is the story of what we're doing. This is the story of what we're doing as part of like, you know, young people everywhere working on this thing. And then right now you're contributing by doing this. And then so you have like, already you're galvanizing people to continue through your project or something like that. Even simple communications like that.
Yeah, you're relating this to presentations right now, are you thinking about like when you're presenting on this?
Yeah, but also just like talking with students as part of the project.
Right. I do think that at your age, there is a particular power in being a young person and leveraging that. I feel like I used to give talks to incoming students on how to influence Oberlin College. And you know, as part of this green orientation that we did for many years. And one of the points I'd make is leverage yourself as a student when you talk to the administration and say, you know, everything you do at the institution is part of what I learn here. And using that as a way of sort of stimulating change, like just using who you are. I'm sort of building on what you're saying. You are a young person, a student, and using that vantage point to your advantage. And I think that you can use that in many different contexts. When you present to Good Morning Oberlin, which will be 2 weeks from today, your first bigger public presentation that you do in this class, thinking about exactly as you're saying, how can I say how this is important to me and should be important to you as an entryway into your talk? Yeah. Because people are always interested in young people. They're interested in what young people think, but they need the me, we, and then now part. Yeah, you're up.
With what we've been talking about with the kilowatts and that device, I was really focusing on what Beth was saying that related to the impact that experiential learning can have. Like how when you're trying to help people understand the significance of something, for instance, like why resource management monitoring of data is important. I really think that what you were showing is good in terms of the example that it provides of how if we aren't seeing the data, our assumptions of what we or just our assumptions of how much a certain device will be using in terms of energy are so wildly off that it drives home the importance of being able to monitor stuff pretty effectively.
Right. That's a good point. It's like your intuition. I guess partly what I'm getting from what you're saying is when you use that up there, what you learn is your intuition is not very good.
Or at least just, yeah, basically.
Yeah, you learn that your intuition is not very good and you have something to learn. Maybe it sort of puts you into that space of my intuition isn't so good, so there's things I have to learn. Yeah, interesting, cool stuff. All right, let me say a little bit about, I already talked a little bit about next week. I am reminding you, so we have another guest speaker at the end of next week. Next week is, however, as I mentioned, our last class, it is devoted to you guys making as much progress you possibly can on your projects for a couple of reasons. First, because the semesters, we're already in the second half of the semester, so we just need to make progress. But two is, ideally, your presentation to Good Morning Oberlin 2 weeks from today is not, this is what we're planning on doing, it's this is what we are doing, and here's a little bit of what we've already done, you know, so that, because your final presentation to Kendall at Oberlin is going to be, this is what we've done and learned. So you are sort of, if we think about your journey in this class as a story, you're in the middle of your story. You should be in the middle of your story by there, where we have done this and we're finding this, and here's what's next, you know, is where you should be in your story journey for that. So getting as much done next week so that you can be in that position. You know, for instance, thinking about your project with the display case, I would think that a good goal for Good Morning Oberlin is to have a really nice, maybe alternate set of designs that you can put in front of people and say, here's where our thinking is, here's one conceptualization of how it could be, here's another. And, you know, even throwing out, you know, I mean, it's gonna be really tight for time, but we'd love to, we're seeking feedback on that. So you're kind of asking them to sort of think about which one of these would be preferable and why, with some ideas behind why you have these different proposals, something like that. And you know, parallels obviously on the other projects in terms of thinking about where's a good point you could be in terms of data you've collected. You guys obviously have lots of stuff already that you can sort of leverage and think about, here's what we're beginning to find about these stories, and yeah.
So I'm curious about these presentations for Good Morning Oberlin. Will we have more free rein as to how we decide to structure them?
You will have, I mean, I think that they all need, the one thing that we got a very clear message from like Elizabeth and Sharon is we probably have less and not more time because they want it to be super tight. I think Elizabeth in particular was saying, I found this a little overwhelming, so I think we're gonna need to be careful about like the rule of numbers and recognizing, and this is important in talks in general, recognizing that my goal is not to communicate everything that I've learned so far. My goal is to tell an interesting story about what I've done so far that communicates some of what I'm learning so far so that we don't saturate people. So like enough information so that they know what you're doing and enough conclusions drawn from what you're doing for them to see some interesting finding, but not feeling like a need to be comprehensive in this. And particularly with this audience, because you know, your first presentation was sort of like, more or less it was a presentation of your proposal. So you kind of needed to describe the scope of what you were doing. You don't fully need to describe the scope of what you're doing for this presentation. This is much more about engaging and entertaining and leaving people with a take-home point, maybe. So you want them, we want to think about this audience, and just to say a little bit more about this audience, I've told you about this audience before, but Good Morning Oberlin is you know, ostensibly it's supposed to be a meeting of businesses, but it isn't that. It's some business people, but a lot of people who work for nonprofits come to this event. So it's sort of like people who do stuff in the community and care about the community. And so they're going to be particularly interested in things you're doing that are relevant to the larger community. They don't find what's going on campus unimportant. Like, I think they'd be fascinated about orbs, you know, but their connection is they're interested in Oberlin, the city of Oberlin, and making the city of Oberlin a better and more interesting and vibrant and sustainable place. That's kind of, and and they need to be entertained basically, and don't imagine that they have tons of attention span, because this is not a professional meeting. This is people who are just interested in understanding what's going on, and if you give them too much information, they'll saturate, and we'll be going over the rule of 7 on that one. So yes, on that. So let me say a little bit about the structure of next week. So we do have a guest speaker in Thursday's class, as we did in this class. Monday will be devoted to more project meetings and time for you to work on your project. So that's a thing. What I want to begin to do is give you some space within classes for you guys to put stuff in front of the class that you want feedback on. So there is a document, I will now stop this thing.